Next, on Current News, have you made your way back underground yet?
1 year later, we're back in the subways hearing from the MTA and riders about crime, COVID, and if the crowds will ever return. I'm Jessica Easthope, and that's ahead.
Then, Democrats in the House introduced legislation that would expand the Supreme Court to 13 seats. But does it stand a chance of ever becoming law? Plus, Representative Nicole Malliotakis just returned from a trip to the U.S. Mexico border. She gives us her eyewitness account of the conditions on the ground. And Bishop DiMarzio weighs in on a very important Vatican conference on priestly vocations. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. 1 year into the pandemic and the New York City subway system is seeing some setbacks, high crime, low ridership, and a massive loss in revenue. Current News' Jessica Easthope went underground for a one-on-one with the chairman of the MTA.
In the year since we last went in-depth underground, the city and its subway system are evolving around the pandemic. Crime is up, ridership is down, and now the MTA is pulling out all the stops to get people back onto the trains. Train after train. The cars are near empty. At Bowling Green Station in downtown Manhattan, people appear to be staying socially distant on the platform. Or are there just less people?
The negative impact on ridership and revenues is orders of magnitude worse than the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, subway ridership at the bottom went down 13%. In March or April of 2020, subway ridership was down 95%.
In an exclusive interview, MTA Chairman Pat Foy said the last year has been the most challenging ever for the agency, with ridership still down 35%. And not just because of COVID.
The increase in crimes, and that resonates and frankly terrifies New Yorkers, and no one wants to go back to the bad old days of rampant crime.
According to a survey of more than 25,000 active riders released by the MTA this week, only 26% were satisfied with safety on trains. Crime and harassment was the top concern. 72% say they're, quote, very concerned about safety on their commutes.
In the later hours of the night, you know, it's hardly anyone else on the train, and it's concerning.
I don't have headphones in. I keep my back to the wall.
To address safety concerns, the MTA added 600 more NYPD officers to its subway patrol. But the officers are spread out among 472 subway stations. Many riders say they haven't seen an increased police presence.
I live in Brooklyn, and I don't see police ever.
But the MTA's disinfecting efforts on trains and platforms are being noticed.
They've been very clean. I think commendable of the MTA, frankly. I think that it's been well managed and maintained.
If it wasn't for federal aid, the MTA would have lost $5.6 billion this year, which is why Foy says getting riders back is the priority.
To welcome New Yorkers and tourists from around the country and around the world back to the subway system, present to every one of them a safe and secure environment, we're going to need more policing and homeless services just to do that.
The MTA is raising toll prices on bridges and tunnels, a move that's expected to generate more than $116 million in the first full year. As for subway fares, that increase has been postponed for several months. In downtown Manhattan, Jessica Easthope, Current News.
New York Mayor Bill de Blasio hopped on the train himself this week, hoping to show New Yorkers it's safe to ride the subway again. De Blasio taking a swipe at the MTA for releasing the survey mentioned in Jessica's report, saying its release discourages ridership. The fate of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is still in limbo after reports of rare blood clotting issues in a handful of women. The CDC Advisory Committee says they need more information before they can make a recommendation and has scheduled another meeting. Dr. Anthony Fauci stressed that pausing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not the same as canceling it and that the pause will likely be short-lived. The Biden administration is expelling 10 Russian diplomats and imposing sanctions on dozens of companies. This in response to the Kremlin's interference in last year's presidential election and the widespread hacking into multiple federal agencies. The sanctions are the first direct action against Russia since Biden took office. Progressive Democrats introduced legislation Thursday that proposes expanding the Supreme Court from 9 to 13 seats, a move Republicans have come to call court packing. The introduction comes just days after President Biden created a commission to study potential structural changes. After the Trump administration, conservatives now hold a 6-3 edge. Senator Ed Markey is leading the charge.
We are here today because the United States Supreme Court is broken. It is out of balance, and it needs to be fixed.
But even before Markey unveiled the bill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she has no intention of bringing it to the floor. However, she does believe the idea should be studied, as it currently is under Biden's commission. That team of 36 members includes 2 professors from law schools at Catholic universities. We can expect pros and cons in 180 days. In the meantime, let's take a look at what President Biden has previously said about a possible expansion. We're seeing a shift of position over the years. Back in 1983, then Senator Joe Biden called FDR's packing proposal a bonehead idea.
It was totally within his right to do that. He violated no law. He was legalistically absolutely correct, but it was a bonehead idea.
Then, years later, during Biden and Trump's debate back in September, Biden wouldn't tell voters if he'd support it.
Senator, I'm not going to answer the question.
Why wouldn't you answer that question?
The question is, the question is,
Justice, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
He later said he was not a fan, and then went on to clarify in a one-on-one interview that if elected, he would create a commission because it was, quote, getting out of whack. Guatemala's president is blaming the Biden administration for the current crisis at the border. President Alejandro Giammattei says the administration's messages on migrating to the U.S. were confusing, quote, because of the way they were translated here. The Guatemalan leader went on to say the messages sounded like they were telling parents that the U.S. will take the children should they travel to the border. A Texas judge is giving the federal government the okay to take a Texas family's land for the border wall. The case of eminent domain was initiated by the Trump administration in 2020. The Department of Justice tried to postpone the case, but the judge granted the DOJ's original motion. Customs and Border Protection says they have suspended all wall projects except for activities that are safety related. Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, who represents parts of Brooklyn and Staten Island, is just back from the border. The Republican was among a group of GOP leaders who visited the southern border with Mexico to get a firsthand look at the migrant crisis. She joins us now to talk about what's going on. Congresswoman, first tell us, why did you want to go to the border?
Well, you know, the reports that had come out at the end of March, citing that we were at a 15-year high for illegal migration, 175,000 individuals that are crossing our border during what is a health crisis. It was very concerning to me, and it was invited by Minority Whip Scalise to be part of a delegation to visit it firsthand and also speak to the Customs and Border Patrol as well as the law enforcement in the area. It was a very alarming trip. I mean, to go there and see what is taking place, it is completely outrageous, and you have to see it for yourself. And I really urge the President and Vice President to make this journey and speak to the Customs and Border Protection agents themselves to hear what we heard and see what we saw, because I know that they will take action, because what is occurring here is not just a public health crisis, it is a humanitarian crisis, it is also a national security crisis.
I want to talk a little bit about what you did see there. I want to show this video you posted to Twitter. It's of the migrant children in the facility in Donna, Texas. Describe the conditions there.
It was very, very sad. I mean, children are being jammed and crammed into bubbles where they stay all day long on top of each other. Some are crying, they want to go home, they want their families, they don't know why they're there. And you know, the facility that we saw in Donna, Texas, 250 capacity, they had 4,000 individuals there. Certainly not part of the social distancing, and they're not following any science. You know, there's some atrocities that are taking place right now in this journey. These people are viewed as a commodity by the smugglers and the cartels. It can be stopped today.
Yeah, you know, there's another video that apparently shows a route that smugglers are using. Let's show that video first. It doesn't look like it's an easy journey for these migrants.
No, some of them told us 40 days to come to the United States, and they're being smuggled. And again, they're paying probably $8,000, $48,000 estimated to the amount of people that are coming over a month. You're talking about $500 million that the cartels are making, and it's the diversion of the CBP. As a matter of fact, at that site, the Border Protection told us that there was a case a couple of weeks ago where when they tried to move in on the smugglers, that they threw a 6-month-old baby into the Rio Grande at that site, not too far away from that shot that you're showing. And they knew that the CBP agents would run to save the baby as opposed to going after them. And so it was a getaway for them. So, I mean, they are viewing people as a commodity. This administration is encouraging it. We could stop it today. And I urge the Vice President to visit not just, the Southern American countries, go to the American side of the border and talk to these patrol agents who are doing the job. They're begging for these policies that President Trump put in place to be restored.
I know President Biden just made an agreement with some Latin American countries to put military at their borders to stop the migration. What more can the federal government do to stop these cartels and smugglers?
Well, they need to reinstate the migrant protocols that President Trump put in place. They can keep individuals in their home country as they apply for asylum. They can also add, judges closer to the border, so they can be more judges, so they can adjudicate these asylum claims. Remember, less than 10% are legitimate. So if you release them back into the country, they won't return for court. And so that is a concern. But also having more law enforcement, giving CBP the tools they need to do their job, that's all part of it. I think that you have to send a message that our borders are not open for illegal migration. I'm the daughter of a Cuban refugee. And when my mom came to this country, there were protocols, there was a process, there was order. What I saw was disorder and chaos. We can't be sending that message to these countries around the world. And the other part of this is we got to give teeth to our agencies like the DEA to be able to go after these cartels. And I think that is a major part of it as well, because these facilities are being diverting attention of CBP, and they got to work in cooperation with all these other entities. But you got to give them the tools and the resources and the teeth to do so.
All right, Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, representing New York's 11th District. Thanks for keeping us updated.
Thank you.
A major symposium is being planned at the Vatican aimed at increasing vocations. Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio spoke to us about why this gathering is so important.
Many people say the Second Vatican Council somehow left the priesthood out. They spoke a lot more about the episcopacy, but there was not a deep dive into the theology of priesthood. And that's about 50 years ago now. So it may be time now today to recognize that. Anytime that you can clarify anything that might be misunderstood. I think there may be some people today that are reticent to recruit vocations because there's lack of clarity about what the priest should do. So I think if we clarify that, it'll make it easier to say this is what we're recruiting for.
Bishop DiMarzio went on to say that a clear program of recruitment is key. The 3-day symposium is scheduled for February of next year. There's a lot more news headed your way. American troops are leaving Afghanistan. We take an inside look at life in the country under Taliban control. Plus, a rare behind-the-scenes tour of Notre Dame's reconstruction 2 years after the cathedral went up in flames.
I feel okay, more happy, because he is with me.
And love in the most unlikely of places. A Nebraska couple tying the knot as one of them battles COVID-19.
There are now some big changes to the tablet website. You can get personalized access to the Catholic news you value. Sign up for free at thetablet.org.
A day after President Biden announced American troops in Afghanistan will be coming home, the Secretary of State made a surprise visit to the country.
These service members risked their lives. Thousands gave their lives. And we've succeeded in achieving the objective we set out to achieve because of their service, because of their sacrifice.
Antony Blinken met with U.S. service members and embassy personnel, as well as the Afghan president. He says the partnership the U.S. has with Afghanistan is changing but is enduring. All troops will be withdrawn by September 11th. And as America's longest war finally comes to an end after 20 years, we're taking an inside look at Afghanistan with the Taliban in control. Now that America is leaving Afghanistan after nearly 2 decades of blood lost, many wonder what world is left behind for ordinary Afghans. Taliban stronghold Musa Qala is where many American and British soldiers died. Now it's a snapshot of how the Taliban will run Afghanistan. 6 men living there talk about what it's like. In short, bleak for women, a few smartphones, but for all, Taliban justice and Taliban taxes.
There are consequences. If you don't pay, they beat you or imprison you.
Taliban roam the market U.S. Marines once patrolled 10 years ago. The Americans were based here on a location you can see on this satellite image, not far from the empty shop where the Taliban have their temporary courts, which they call the Room, dispensing swift, brutal justice.
Punishments depend on what the other side wants. If the plaintiff forgives a murderer, the court might not give a death sentence. But if the relatives demand it, they may.
Few women are allowed on the streets. They still don't go to school. Nobody even dares to ask about that.
They are not allowed to do business outside their house. When they go out, they need to dress according to Sharia law. So for them, it's more important to take care of their homes than working outside.
The Taliban sets taxes from opium, harvests, or shops. But some said when different Taliban groups feud, people can pay more than once.
Many people have been taken to the Taliban room, locked up for a night or 2, or have been beaten up. There are different groups of Taliban. It would be better to have a single authorized official getting tax, but every group tries to take tax for their own pockets. That's one problem for people now.
The Secretary of State says even with our troops home, the U.S. will continue to invest in and support the Afghan people. 2 years ago today, the world watched in horror as fire engulfed the famous Notre Dame Cathedral. The church's rector, Monsignor Patrick Chauvet, is choosing not to see this day as a tragedy, but a sign of hope.
Pas le 2e anniversaire de l'incendie, mais qu'on célèbre plutôt la résurrection de la cathédrale et l'avenir de la cathédrale.
Monsignor Chauvet says he remembers the day the cathedral burned down and that he cried in the square as he saw the flames rise. He now thanks the amazing professionals who are restoring his beloved cathedral. French President Emmanuel Macron and the restoration workers are determined to meet their goal of having Notre Dame up and running by 2024. Melissa Bell gives us a behind-the-scenes look inside Notre Dame Cathedral's reconstruction.
Its vaulted ceilings, stained glass windows, and elaborate columns. As you can see on these images, so much of what makes Notre Dame one of the world's most exquisite Gothic wonders stands tall, almost miraculously. The construction of the cathedral may have taken 182 years from when it began in 1163. It took the fire of 2019 a matter of hours to compromise its stability. The work of the last 2 years has been all about ensuring that the cathedral stayed upright.
We have to be sure that the structure is solid, so I have to take a lot of measures to consolidate. We don't want to make a reconstruction without being reassured.
Here you can see the iconic North Tower that at one point had been threatened by the flames on the night of the fire. In the end, they were put out before it could collapse. But this was where the most devastating part of the fire took place. It was here that the famous Notre Dame Spire once stood.
As the world watched, the spire, which had been under renovation, collapsed, breaking through the vaulted ceiling, which then crashed into the nave. The scaffolding that had surrounded it, 40,000 tubes of metal now twisted into the structure, then had to be carefully picked through and removed.
This is a place where the spire collapsed. You know, this is the center of a drama.
The general then shows us the exact spot where the spire first came crashing through. Here, the vaulted ceiling is held up by wooden pillars, each weighing 1.5 tons. They ensure, explains the project manager, that if the stones give way for whatever reason, bad weather, a tremor, a shock, well, the wooden support beams will keep the structure standing. Now that the scaffolding for the renovations is ready, General Georgelin says that the work of rebuilding Notre Dame's vaulted ceiling and its spire will begin before the end of the year. Melissa Bell, Paris.
If you would like to help in Notre Dame's restoration, you still can by sponsoring one of the cathedral's many gargoyles. The charity Friends of Notre Dame is allowing people to sponsor or adopt art or artifacts that were damaged in the fire. If you'd like to help, just go to restorenotredame.org. Still to come on Currents News, a marriage inside a hospital's ICU, how one couple is moving on to the next chapter of their lives despite the pandemic. Plus, the New York Philharmonic giving its first public performance after being on hiatus for over a year. After 4 decades together, a Nebraska couple is embarking on the next chapter of their lives. Meet Marta and Julio Schumel. They've experienced many things in the 44 years they've shared, but then Julio fell ill with the coronavirus and was placed in an intensive care unit. There, he decided to take their relationship to the next level.
Porque él dijo que nos casáramos.
Because the day we got married, he said, "Marta, tell me, do you want to get married to me?" And I said, "Of course I will. I will marry you."
The two arranged a small ceremony at the hospital with nurses subbing in as wedding planners. Julio is still recovering in the ICU, but the happy couple says they cannot wait to get home to start their new lives together. Congrats to them. And finally tonight, we all can't wait to be together again and doing some of our favorite pre-pandemic activities. Now, one of them is possible again as the New York Philharmonic hosted their first indoor concert in 400 days. The famous orchestra downsizing because of the pandemic. Only 23 strings, no brass or woodwinds, and all musicians socially distanced. And the audience, too, of course, spaced out and temperature checked. The music lovers also had to show proof of a negative COVID test or completed vaccination. The Philharmonic hopes to resume a regular schedule in September. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. In case you missed last night's concert, here is just a sampling of the Philharmonic's angelic music. Hope to see you again next time.